Hello. Once again, today is, if you're reading this right, the 28th of August, Friday. I think that's right. And today we're going to continue our discussion about the ancient world and the world leading up to Renaissance Europe. And we're going to begin with the end of the Roman Empire, which we talked about yesterday and briefly alluded to. You see, and I hope I didn't go over this yesterday, but once again, Rome simply became too big, too corrupt, too faced with too many problems. They ran out of money. And of course, there were the invasions of the barbarians. Many historians attribute Christianity as one of the causes for the decline of the Roman Empire. And, the history of Christianity is important to European history. To be honest, it's important to world history because Christianity is still the world's largest religion. About 25% of the world's population, in some way, shape, or form, claim to be Christians. And, I wouldn't sit there and make a judgment as to who is and who isn't. That's not what I'm here for. But yeah, they claim adherence to Christian principles. How's that? For the record, though, the fastest growing religion on earth is Islam, and it's about 20% of the world's population. You see, without getting too much into Islam is often referred to as the simple faith. Islam doesn't have all the trappings of Christianity. Trappings meaning functions, expensive kind of celebrations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But let's talk about the end of Rome. So Rome goes through this era that we talked about yesterday, the Pax Romana, 14 AD to 180 AD, during which time Rome basically owned all of Europe and was the most powerful force, not on the planet. Actually, China was just as powerful, but nobody reads about them. But the two had very little contact with each other. But for the now, yeah, from till 180 AD, the end of the reign of Marcus Aurelius. That name sounds familiar if you've ever seen the movie Gladiator. Marcus Aurelius is the emperor who gets murdered by his son Commodus in Gladiator. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. And so after 180 AD, Rome begins a steady decline. I mean, basically, many of the Roman emperors were bumbling fools. They also had a passion for killing each other. I think in the span of 100 years during one spate, Rome had 25 emperors, of whom 4 died from natural causes. So yeah, that was what it was about. And during this time, Rome will come to embrace Christianity after first trying to persecute it. Rome actually Rome tried to stamp out Christianity. Rome came up with this idea that, well, I mean, it's a very common idea in politics today. If things are going bad, then say, hey, look over there. That's what's causing the problem. It's a very common technique. Dictators and tyrants have used it over and over again to try and unite their populace by finding a minority and saying, you know what, those people are crazy, and if we got rid of them, everything would be fine. And the thing is, people believe it. And so, yeah. So anyway, but Rome then, and I have to mention, and this is a guy's name you should jot down, probably one of the most important Roman emperors who never gets mentioned that much. I mean, you've heard of Julius Caesar. Mark Antony, who wasn't an emperor, Augustus Caesar, the first real Roman emperor, the Emperor Constantine, Constantine, the Emperor Constantine. Why was Constantine so important? Well, Constantine was the first Roman emperor to accept Christianity. According to the story, he accepted Christianity because one night he had a dream, and in this dream he stood in a cloud, and a big voice said, "In this symbol you will conquer," and it was the symbol of the cross. And so Constantine interpreted that as meaning that Jesus or Christ or Christianity was going to lead him to victory over his rival. Whether or not that was the real reason for Constantine, I hate stupid light. I hate that. Was the real reason for Constantine's not only accepting of Christianity, but here's the thing: Constantine not only accepted Christianity, put the brakes on persecuting Christians. Constantine said, and this is probably why historians think, and they may not teach you this in Sunday school, but historians think that Constantine may have embraced Christianity because he saw in Christianity one God, one religion, one empire, as a way of uniting the empire. See, because before Constantine and Christianity, Romans worshipped, just a plethora, like that word plethora, a plethora of other gods, the old Greek gods, and they focused on various gods, and it was a very disuniting thing. And Constantine said, hey, what if we just had one God, one faith? That might be a way of unifying the empire. So Constantine not only embraced Christianity, even though it was said and I'll talk to you about that in a minute, he still was a closet worshiper of Apollo, the sun god. Even though he embraced Christianity, he said, you know what? If you live in the Roman Empire, you're a Christian too. And not only that, Constantine said, if we're going to have one faith, it has to be the same Christianity. So Constantine called together in the year 325 AD, I think it was. 325 AD? Yeah, I think it was that. 325 AD, the so-called Council of Nicaea, Nicea. The Council of Nicaea, whereby Constantine called together all of the major authorities on this mystic religion, Christianity, and said, all right, guys, you're not leaving Nicaea, which was a little village on the coast of what is now Turkey. You guys ain't leaving until you basically standardize. In other words, everybody's got to be on the same page of what Christianity stands for. And so, yeah, this giant committee goes to work hashing out. I mean, they answered questions like exactly who is God? And if you ever wonder, I mean, those of you who are practicing Christians, remember that God is not one person. God is three people. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, right? Three entities. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Now that came out of that. The current Bible that is used by most of Christianity, composed of an Old Testament and a New Testament. An Old Testament of 39 books, a New Testament of 27 books. That came out of the Council of Nicaea. And you say, well, of course, what's the big deal about that? The big deal is that prior to Constantine doing that, there were all sorts of gospels floating around. There was, for example, a gospel of Mary Magdalene. There was a gospel of Judas Iscariot. Yeah, that guy, Judas Iscariot. And people were debating, which one's right, which one's not right, which one's accurate. And so Constantine, this committee, they formulated once again of what the religion is supposed to be about. And that was Constantine's idea. One, how you doing? Pretty good. How you doing? I am well. Constantine comes up with this, says we're going to have one faith, and so that's why he was important. Now, and in addition to all that, Constantine did one more thing. The city of Rome, which by this time was well over 1,000 years old. And yeah, for a while, the city of Rome was like Las Vegas. It was a miracle. It was like, streets and running water and flush toilets and all that stuff. But the city of Rome had really kind of fallen into disrepair. Several things had happened. Like, for example, the economy had gotten so bad in the Roman Empire, many of the small farmers and small people who had lost their farms, they said, I got to find a job somewhere. And so they took their entire families and went to the city of Rome thinking they would find something there. They became basically a homeless population. We'd call them the homeless. In Rome, they called them the mob, made up of thousands upon thousands of these people who did nothing but roam the streets of Rome. And they had lots of time on their hands. And they were hungry and dissatisfied. And you have to remember, thank you, you have to remember that the world does not see an organized municipal police force until the early part, about 1830 in London. That was the first time you actually see a police force. That prior to that, if you lived in a big city, you were on your own, literally. There was no police force, no protective force. The rich could hire guards, and they did. But if you were not rich, you were on your own. And so this ginormous mob is, wandering about the city, taking things. And Constantine said, and the city would become filthy. And Constantine said, I got to get out of here. And so what he does, he says, I'll build a new capital. And he starts looking around, and I'm going to pop up a nice map for you. Yeah, there it is. He starts looking around. And by the way, this is a picture of the Roman, not the Roman, this is a picture of the Byzantine Empire. But it's the same. He starts looking around. The best place to build, and you see my cursor here, a new capital is, there was a little fishing village right here in this all-important sea pass. This is the Black Sea. Of course, this is the Mediterranean. Through these straits called the Bosporus and the Dardanelles, which you need to know where they are. And so he said, I'm going to build my new capital here. And he, as you see here, it's surrounded on three sides by water. And on the fourth side, he built a ginormous wall. And he then modestly named this city Constantinople, after himself, of course. Like I said, the man was nothing if not modest. And this became the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. Well, like I said yesterday, the empire was split right about here, right down through here. And the Western Empire went into a much more rapid decay than the Eastern Empire. And once again, in the year 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire supposedly was at end, although that's more of a date that historians pick. But the Eastern Roman Empire, which became known as the Byzantine Empire, which if you notice on your study guide, I don't have any place for the Byzantine Empire, but you do need to make some kind of notation that the Byzantine Empire existed. And what you're looking at there, this is a picture of the Byzantine Empire in the year 555 AD. I imagine this is during the reign of Justinian, and Justinian was the greatest of all the Byzantine emperors. This is the empire that was left, but it was Roman and yet not Roman. I mean, it still was a Christian empire. Uh, it still had a lot of the Roman customs. However, in the Byzantine Empire, the Latin language gave way to spoken Greek. They spoke Greek and wrote Greek, and the Byzantine Empire, culturally speaking, became more and more. The word you want to use there is Oriental, which is one of the words on your next test. The Orient. Anybody know what the word Orient means? And please do not say Chinese or Japanese. The word Orient simply means from the East. So it could mean Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, but also Indian, Persian, Pakistani. From the East is what it means. And so, yeah, the Byzantine Empire became more and more Oriental. Now, I'm going off, I'm going without a script now, talking about the Byzantine Empire, but it's something you need to know. The Byzantine Empire was actually very, very, very important because over here in Western Europe, we are entering what is popularly called the Dark Ages. Now, the Dark Ages were called the Dark Ages not because they hadn't paid their light bill, but because all those nice things that the Romans had done, building roads, aqueducts, flush sewers, public baths, Roman guards standing guard over the Roman highways, preventing crime and those kind of things, even though the Romans were a bunch of jerks. All the nice things they did over time began to fade away. And in Western Europe begins to break up into small feudalistic kingdoms and serfdoms and manors until basically, if you were to draw a political map of Western Europe, it looked like a patchwork quilt. And all of the lords of Europe, of Western Europe, who were basically now descendants of the old Germanic barbarian tribes, the Vandals, the Goths, the Visigoths, the Lombards, they all spent all the time fighting each other. And they were very weak and very disunited. The Byzantine Empire was united. Western Europe was not united. Now, but what the Byzantine Empire does for the western part of Europe, unwittingly and unintentionally, was that because you have this Byzantine Empire setting where it does, it blocks all the powers of the East, the Arabs, the Bulgars, for a while, the Mongols and the Huns, and all of these Persians, and a lot of these tribes who wanted to invade Europe were basically blocked by the Byzantine Empire. And this arrangement literally lasted for 1,000 years. The Byzantine Empire warding off all these invasions. The greatest emperor of the Byzantine Empire was a guy named Justinian. I made reference to him briefly a while ago. Justinian was an emperor who built something called the Hagia Sophia. The Hagia Sophia Church. I should have pulled this up today. Would you guys forgive me if I just go off a little bit? Script. Okay, quick. What's bad is you guys can probably do this a lot faster than me. And there it is. Yeah, this is the Hagia Sophia. Now, if you look at it today, it looks like a mosque because it is a mosque. This is the interior of the Hagia Sophia. Actually, it's more of a museum than a mosque. But yeah, this guy Justinian originally built it as a Christian church. It was the largest Christian church in all the world. And then it became the largest mosque in all the world after the Muslims took it over. But yeah, And so now you see it. Now you don't. Now let's get back to the study guide, shall we? Not there. Not there. Where am I at? Screen. I am so terrible. I hate this. I hate this. Horton. There we go. Forgive me. Yeah. Back to the matter at hand. And so yeah, Rome fell, and this ushers in a period of time called the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, and it deserved its name. I mean, once again, remember all those nice things that the Romans had done when they weren't slaughtering and butchering much of the world, like the paved roads and the hospital. They had hospitals. The Romans performed surgery, libraries, those kind of things. And it was cool if you were Roman. Not so cool if you weren't. But anyway, all those things were gone. And feudalism was called feudalism because the root word of feudalism means to fight. It's fighting. And so yeah, that went on for several hundred years. And if you can imagine that in the feudalistic era, all the nice things, in fact, most of the cities of Western Europe declined in population. Say again, most of the cities, and not only that, most of the countryside declined in population. It is the natural tendency of a human population to expand, but in the Dark Ages, the population actually declined, partially from people killing each other, partially from the fact that, you couldn't live in a city anymore. It was said that in many of the cities, wild animals roamed the streets because the cities had been abandoned. Because you had to go out and find food, and so everybody had to go out. And going out to farm to find food on your own meant that you were then subject to whoever wanted to hit you in the head and take what you had. And so that ushers in the feudalistic age. And feudalism, this is why I'm missing my whiteboard. Feudalism is a political system, that is based on two things: fear and protection. In other words, if you're average Joe living during the feudal age, you need to be protected. And so it's really kind of like living in a prison. And please don't say Master Arnold's talking about us going to prison day. No. But people in prison have to make a choice. In prison, you get approached by somebody else who, offers you protection. Now, if you accept his protection, then you have to basically give him everything or her everything you own. And if the person's feeling good, he'll give you a part of that back. That's called feudalism. And of course, you have to then do everything this person says. That's feudalism. And so, yeah, that was the world that evolved. The problem is, though, you were never really safe. The middle-aged person had to worry about violence every day of his life. He never knew when he'd be out there in the middle of the field farming his crops, and coming over the hill would be a band of Arab Muslims. The Arab Muslims invaded Spain in the year 722 AD and didn't leave for almost 800 years. Yeah. You never knew if it was them, or it could be the Vikings. The Vikings from Scandinavia quickly learned how easy it was. The Vikings had their one piece of technology that made them superior were their boats. The Vikings ships, the same ships that they sailed literally from Europe to North America 500 years before Columbus did, the Viking ships, those same ships could also sail up a river with no more than 4 feet of water to hold them up. And with those kind of ships, they could sail far up the rivers and they could come rob, pillage, and trust me, they murdered lots of people. Yeah, the Vikings, they were some violent people. We could talk about, there was this uh, one kid who, during the day, he was playing with a friend of his, and the friend had somehow made him mad. And this little boy split his friend's head open with an axe. And then he went home and told his mom about it. And the mom said, he's going to make a good Viking. And if you understand that about the Vikings, then the Vikings. Then, of course, from the east, and this will be on your test, a group of people called the Magyars. M-A-G. Magyars. The Magyars. Anybody know who they are? If you ever, and I have, I'm so proud to say, if you ever travel in Eastern Europe and happen to find yourself in Hungary, the native language of Hungary is Magyar. They're the Huns. H-U, yes, Huns. Come on, Huns, Hungary. Yeah, the Magyars. I went to Budapest 2 years ago. Lovely, wonderful city. I like Budapest. But the Magyars, before they finally settled in Hungary. You had to worry about that. But more than likely, you had to worry about just your neighbor. And I mean, the lord from the estate maybe 10 miles away from you, deciding their wheat crop wasn't good enough to carry them through the winter and come and raid yours. And of course, you put up a fight, they kill you. And then there's the ever-present chance of disease, a failed crop. During the Middle Ages, the farming methods had not changed at all since literally the days of the Stone Age. And, there was the failing crops, and life was just awful. It was just awful. The average person lived, and I wish I could draw something for you. The average person lived in a home that was made of sticks. And by the way, sticks, what they do, they would dig holes in the ground in a circle, put the sticks in the holes, okay? And then they would get vines out of the forest and weave the vines between the sticks to make kind of a lattice work, okay? And then they would take what was called mud and daub, D-A-U-B. And you say, what's that? Mud and daub is a combination of, mud, hay, straw, and manure. Why manure? It's a good insulator. Yeah. And they would take that and cover the lattice work of brushes with that, and then, bring it to the top, have a thatched roof with a hole at the top. And that was home sweet home. Windows, maybe they put a flap over an opening because they'd need to let some kind of light in. The door would be some kind of a blanket. And in the middle of this grand establishment, they would have a flat stone laid on the ground, and that's where they put the fire. Oh yeah, one more thing. You see, animals during this time, by that sheep, pigs, cattle, goats, chickens, very precious. And you couldn't let the animals go out at night. You let them go out at night, A, somebody will take them, or B, some predator would take them. And so you brought the animals in the house and kept them. Yeah. And so, that's the Middle Ages. That's the average person. Their life was, first of all, very short. The average lifespan was like 25 years. And that, of course, that doesn't mean everybody died when they're 25 years old. It means that most people died when they were less than 5 years old. Childbirth, then as today, was the leading cause of death for women around the world. Check it. Yeah, most women in the medieval age spent most of their lives either getting or recovering from pregnancy. And yeah. Okay, so that's a description of the medieval world. Let's push on and talk a little bit about some of the more important people of this medieval world, beginning with Charlemagne. Charlemagne went by several names, and I hope you're writing. See, that we're getting into the part where it's going to be included in test. Charlemagne was called Charles the Great, English name. Karl der Grosser, Karl Der Grosser, Grosser, which is German for great. Carolus Magnus, Carolus Magnus, Carolus Magnus, or Charlemagne, the French name. Charlemagne was this Frank. He was a Frank. That was his tribe, which eventually, yes, the Franks became not only the French, but also the Germans. Yeah, most people don't realize that. The Franks. I mean, where do you think they get the name Frankfurt, which is in Germany? Yeah, Charlemagne was a king of the Franks, and I am not answering that. Charlemagne was a king of the Franks who actually tried to bring the Roman Empire back. In fact, to be real honest, everybody tried to bring the Roman Empire back. Adolf Hitler tried to bring the Roman Empire back. The British Empire tried to bring the Roman Empire back. They all thought they were the new Rome. The Russians thought they were the inheritors of the Roman Empire. But anyway, Charlemagne tried to bring it back. And actually, Charlemagne did a pretty good job. He established a kingdom which was comprised of what we now know as France and much of Germany, Switzerland, and the Low Countries. Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Belgium. And yeah, he actually was able to unite it for as long as he lived. Then he died. During his life, though, he actually brought back some of the elements of the Roman Empire, like reading and writing. Charlemagne thought that everybody should learn. Charlemagne himself learned how to read and write. Reading and writing had gone the way of extinction for the most part in Europe. In fact, in Europe, for many years, it was considered effeminate to learn how to read and write. Totally useless. Charlemagne brought it back for a while. And then he died. He died, and his three sons began arguing over who should get his inheritance. And that argument came to blows, came to warfare, until the Treaty of Verdun of 832 AD. And at the Treaty of Verdun, it was agreed. You see those names of it: Charles the Bald, Louis the German, and Lothar. Charles the Bald. No more water. Charles the Bald inherited, it was agreed he would get France, what we now know as France, roughly. Louis the German, I wonder what he got. He got the other side of the Rhine River. You know, the Rhine is pretty much looked upon as a divider between France and Germany. Lothar took a small region that became known as Burgundy. And I bet you wouldn't guess what the official color of Burgundy. Burgundy was called Burgundy because there was the plant there that created this deep red dye. Burgundy. Ta-da, look at that. Okay. So yes, now we're still in the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages really don't go away until after the Crusades. But yeah, let's talk about the Dark Ages. First of all, the Dark Ages were also during a period of time called the Age of Faith. Now that sounds nice, except it should have been retitled the Age of Ignorance. Not, don't go home and say, Mom, Miss Harton said it was ignorant to have faith. I didn't say that. But during uh, this time, the strongest, and now this you need to write down, during the Age of Faith, the strongest entity in Europe between the fall of the Roman Empire in the West and probably the Reformation of 1415. The strongest single entity in Europe was the Roman Catholic Church. Say again, the strongest single entity in Europe from the fall of Rome, 476 AD, until, Protestant Reformation, Roman Catholic Church. This was the Age of Faith. Now, the Age of Faith was rooted in the ignorance, to be honest, in the ignorance of the people. I mean, think about it. You're a Joe average person, peasant. And we'll talk about what peasants and serfs are later on. And I talked to you just before about what your house looked like and what your life looked like. And how, I mean, imagine living a life where you never tasted anything sweet. Never. Because sugar was still over in the Western Hemisphere. Yeah, there was honey, but honey was expensive. I mean, bees kind of resentful, about you taking their stuff. And, fruit came and went, but never having tasted something that was decadently sweet. Never had, And that's just one thing. Every day of your life was cold and miserable. You lived in a house that animals took a poop in, and every day you knew what you expected. And what you expected was you had to work today if the weather permitted. And in doing that work, you may or may not, live to see 15 years of life. Your life was unsure. And so in steps the Roman Catholic Church. And guess what the Roman Catholic, and here it is. So you got to write this down. The Roman Catholic Church. Why was the Roman Catholic Church so powerful then and not powerful now? It's the same Roman Catholic Church. Answer, the Roman Catholic Church held the keys to heaven. For these people with their pathetic lives, and by pathetic, I don't mean, to be ridiculing. They were horrible. Their lives were just pathetic and boring and so full of hardship and, and here's the Roman Catholic Church, which, and if you've ever been into a Roman Catholic cathedral, a Roman Catholic church, a big one especially the European churches. Imagine you're a peasant and you live in rags and you live in a mud hut, and every day of your life is total drudgery. But one day of the week or other days of the week, you get to go to Mass, and this church is intentionally built to be so beautiful. It's a preview of heaven, by the way. And yeah, the church says if you do what we say, then when you die, you get to go to heaven. If you don't collect $200, don't pass go, and you get to spend eternity being chased around by people with pitchforks. Yeah, eternal damnation, forever and ever, amen. And I mean, I'm sitting here, we're kind of saying it so flip, but the people of medieval Europe, they believe that like they believe the sun would come up tomorrow. And so, yeah, the Age of Faith. That is why the church could ask for and demand people to do anything it wanted. For example, tithing, which is on your test. What's tithing? Tithing is the practice of paying 10% of your income, whatever you have, to the church. Now, if everybody pays 10% of what they have to the church is going to have a nice chunk of change, which they did. And so, yeah, church became rather wealthy, and the church became very powerful And by powerful, I don't just mean that, they had this control of the people's spiritual lives. The Roman Catholic Church of this era raised and maintained physical armies that enforced the will of the church. But the church could do more than that. You say, well, what if some king, you might say, well, what if some king decided, I'm not going to do what the church says. Now I'm the king and I'm not going to do what the church says. Well, the church had ways of enforcing that. One way was called excommunication. You say, what's that? Excommunication. Ex and then communication. One word. Well, excommunication means that a person is denied the sacraments, basically kicked out of church. And we all might go, I don't care. You don't want to go to Mass anyway. During the Middle Ages, that meant you were denied the sacraments, and if you happened to die, that meant that, once again, do not pass go, do not collect $200, and go spend the rest of eternity with some unfriendly people. And that was a powerful, powerful threat. But here's the other one, and you need to write this down. It was called and by the way, you would be, if you were kicked out of the church, you would be branded as, here's a word, will be on your test. The word is heretic, Heretic. Heretic comes from the word heresy, which means to be outside, to teach something contrary to the will of the church, practice heresy. And yeah, you'd be denied the sacraments, the benefits of the church. And then finally, here's the one that the church used against rulers who bucked their will. It was called the interdict, Interdict. I give up. Not much water. The interdict. Well, you say, what's the interdict, Mr. Horton? The interdict The interdict was the short definition for church lockout. You say, what does that mean? It means that the Roman Catholic Church would send a papal bull. A papal bull, which is on your test, is a direct order from the Pope. A papal bull telling the local priest to lock the doors of the church, thereby denying not only that king or lord or duke or whoever it was who was being a jerk the entrance into the church, but also the local populace, the peasants, the serfs, and everyone. If there was one thing that could make the peasants and the serfs rise up against their feudal masters, their so-called protectors, would be if they believed that their only gateway to heaven had just been shut down by the actions of their ruler. One of the kings of the Holy Roman Empire, a guy named John, he hacked off the church, the Pope, and the Roman Catholic Church, closed up all the churches in his kingdom. And of course, the people were about to go through, but they were going to riot. They were going to overthrow him. They were going to kill him. And so this John, has to travel down to the Pope's winter home in the Apennine Mountains, the Apennines are in central Italy. And he had to a king had to stand outside in the snow for 3 days, waiting for the Pope to see him in the snow. And eventually the Pope said, yeah, okay, you're a jerk. thanks for saying you're wrong, and the interdict was lifted. But that tells us the power of the Roman Catholic Church. But probably the one thing that showed the power of the Roman Catholic Church more than any other was the Crusades. And I think that's a good subject to talk about tomorrow, don't you? The Crusades. We'll talk about the Crusades and the Black Death, and then also these three instances. Yes. So yeah, subject matter for well, I guess Monday. We'll begin with the Crusades. In the meantime, it's been good talking to you. Now get ready to laugh while I try to shut this down. Okay? I will see you in class. Okay, come on now. Don't mess up. Nope. Ah, there we go. Yes. And yeah. That does not help me at all.